suicide can affect every kind of population. I would like to start with saying that World Health Organizations recognize that suicide is a worldwide phenomenon that affects every region of the world. And I would like to add that suicide doesn't affect population according to their socio-economical status. It affects everybody. The suicide is the fourth cause of death between young men between 15 and 19 years. Every year, 7,000 every year 700,000 people recur to suicide. The unconsummated suicide is a risk factor in every individual and is a red alert for us to see them and to watch out and care for them. And we need to see why that person recurs to suicide. We need to see the context. We need to see what are the factors. What are the factors that edging the person to recur to suicide? The World Health Organization defines the suicide as an act realized by a person by a person in full knowledge or expectation of the final ending. They also say that suicide is a multifactorial problem that is the result of an interaction of multiple factors, just as biological, genetics, psychological, sociological, and environmental. Simply talking, I need you to understand that when a person commits suicide or an intent of suicide, that person have already think about it for a long, long time. And there's a part of the thinking that it calls the rumination. And that rumination comes when the person thinks about the suicide for a long, long time. So it's just not the fact that they want to commit suicide, but another factorial problems that involve with the individual. So the multifactorial problems, the multifactorial facts are those who influence the person to commit the suicide, because the person could have the suicide behaviors, the suicide thinkings, but the suicide thoughts, but the factors for the biological, the social, most important are the facts who that bordered the person to commit suicide at the end. So when we talk, we have to see the surrounding factors of the person, and and although if and although the suicide affects every kind of population, there are some countries that have more risk factors because of their political structure, their social structure, their economy structure. So we need to see the context of the person and how this person reacts to that context, how that context affects the person and affects the behavior of the person. According to an author, the suicide of a person is only the reaction of an emerging social problem that has not been resolved. The reasons of why a person could end with its life are many, but the most frequent causes are mental disease, addictions, um, a breakup, or a death of a parent or a relative. So again, I want you to understand that the spheres surrounding the person are the most important in the understanding about suicide. Just as I mentioned before, the most frequent causes of suicide is mental disease, addictions, breakups, and death of a relative. Adding to the most frequent causes, we also have emotional crisis, physical disease, unemployment, economical problems, uh, traumas in the childhood, problems of suicide in the family, and social problems. So it's not only about biological problems, but it's also about, and the most important problems are the social, the emotional, and the problems surrounding the person who has suicide behaviors. So when we talk about emotional crisis and economical problems, we remember the Maslow's basic needs. So according to Maslow, we need to have complete every level of that pyramid. So any imbalance at any level of the Maslow's pyramid can make the people have suicidal behaviors, suicide thoughts. So we need to see the different spheres surrounding the person and identifying, watching how the person reacts and how the person behaves with the spheres surrounding him, just as the social sphere, how that person behaves with the family, how the person behaves with the friends, and we need to pay attention if the person have emotional changes, if the person reacts with more anger, of the person shows anxiety behaviors. So all these factors are what we need to see, what we need to pay attention in each of them. According to Gomez, the risk of suicide is the probability of developing behaviors that intentionally threaten life. These are classified in mild, moderate, and severe. And it has three phases: the suicide desire, the suicide thought, and the suicide act. So according to this phrase, we can understand better how the suicide becomes from a suicide desire to a suicide act. We can understand how a person starts with desiring to die, how the person wants not to be here, wants to disappear, and then how it becomes in an idea, how that person starts to planning, how the person thinks how to complete the suicide thought. And finally, it ends with the suicide act. Usually in the suicidal thought, the person starts to think about how the suicide can resolve the problems that the person has, and how, according to them, the suicide is the best way to end with the suffer, the best way to end with all the problems that are surrounding them. And that thoughts are and those thoughts are the ones that burden the person to commit the suicide. Usually when they are about to do the suicide acts, they usually start for screaming for help, but not in a direct way, because they start to they start to talk about the suffer and the problems that they have and how they think so much about death and how they think that the death, that the suicide could help them to resolve all the problem. And they start to talk about it with their social sphere, and we need to pay attention on that. We need to pay attention to that because after that, usually they commit the suicide attempt. So when we identify a patient with suicide behaviors, with suicide thoughts, we need to see their context, their social context, because the fact that one person have suicide behaviors or suicide thoughts, it's a red alert to us to see if there's something in the social text that may be surrounded, that might be bordered that person to the suicide desire, to the suicide thoughts. It's not like today I'm really fine and tomorrow I want to die. The suicide thoughts are a very, very slow, has a very, very slow development. So when we talk about suicide, we need to understand, although the cognitive distortions. The cognitive distortions are wrong process of thinking that results in information processing, just as the misinterpretation of what occurs surrounding us, making negative consequences. So in the suicidal mind, the processing of information is usually misinterpreted, and this misinformation and this misinterpretation of the information is what generate despair in the person, making that person wants to commit suicide, wants that person have a desire of suicide. Okay, an example of the processing of information: when we see through our eyes, the information comes to our eyes and it goes to the brain through the optical nerves, and then the brain interprets the information. And that interpretation is what we call perception. But in a suicidal mind, the perception is not good enough. The perception is distorted. So in a healthy mind, the perception could be not harmful at all. But in a suicidal mind, what they see probably is not bad or probably is not wrong. But as the way as they see it generates hopelessness, and that hopelessness helps the suicidal thoughts to increase. And we need to remember that is not the fault of the person, because the person is influenced by the social context. Talking about cognitive distortions, there are so many cognitive distortions, but for this session, I just picked two of most frequent cognitive distortions. One of them is the reading of the mind. What is this? Is when the person thinks that the other person is thinking something wrong about them. For example, I think that other people that is in a mall is watching me and thinking that I am ugly, or I think that that person is upset about me because something. I don't know what I did, but I think that person is upset with me. Or, for example, in another context, in the work or in the school, I think that other people doesn't believe in me, doesn't believe in my capability to do things. So that is one of the most common cognitive distortions in the suicide behaviors. And another is that they can guess the future. But in this example, they predict the future, but in a negative way. In a negative way, involving failures or danger. For example, I thought that in my work interview, it's going to be all wrong. Or, for example, me as a translator, I think, oh no, I won't translate good enough. So that people think that when they're going to do some action, and that thought makes the person anxious, makes the person to develop an anxious behavior. And obviously, if you think that in something it's not going to be good for you, Usually the mind is predisposed. So these thoughts are distortion by the mind of that person, and that same thoughts are which doesn't allow to the person to move forward on that vicious circle. Another thought is the catastrophication. The catastrophication is like when the person is waiting for a mess, is waiting for a disaster to occur, and that disaster will be terrible, and that disaster will be unbearable in the person who's thinking about that. Here in these thoughts, the affective aspect is very, very important, because those persons with catastrophication thoughts think, oh, it will be terrible that my partner left me, or I can't stand the failure. Some things of that are the thoughts that the persons with catastrophications have. Another one is the labeling. This labeling is label the negative traits about itself. For example, I am a loser, I am undesirable, he is a great person and I am not. And this labeling is not encouraging. It's not encouraging, but it's the opposite. So in this category of labeling, the person starts to think that, okay, I'm not good enough in this world, I'm not a good friend. So they start to think that the world will be better without them. For example, oh no, I'm not a good friend. So if I disappear, if I die tomorrow, my friends won't miss me. So that are the kind of thoughts that the person starts to think, and border that person to commit the suicide or to commit the suicidal behaviors. Another though is the disqualifying or leaving aside the positive in ourselves. The person considers in a unreasonable way that the experiences, the achievements, and the qualities of himself are not worth. For example, that person thinks that when a person says, I like you, the person says that because the person is kind, because the person doesn't want to hurt them. So that people start to think that that person starts to think that the recognition and the praise of other people are not true, are not in a positive way. Just they are saying it because it's their responsibility, or because they are good persons, or because they don't want to hurt their feelings. And another thought in here is the negative filter. The negative filter is when the person just focus exclusively in the negative details, in the negative actions, and in the negative, just in the negative. And usually they don't see the positive things that happen, and only focus on all the negative comments, all the negative actions, the failures. And an example is, our marriage is not good because we argued yesterday, even if it's the first argue ever. So that negative focusing is exhausting for the person, and at the beginning it affects at the beginning affects not so much as a long-term thinking about negative things. So all of these thoughts for a person are real, and these thoughts helps to the suicidal thoughts, to the suicidal behaviors, because there is it is overwhelming, is exhausting, and if the people can't find anything positive in its life, they start to think, okay, if there's nothing positive, why am I alive? What is the purpose to being alive? And they usually think that all the things surrounding them, it's wrong. Everything about them is wrong. Everything they do, it's completely wrong. So they don't have a middle point. They're always at the end of the scale, at the end of the balance. So for them, everything is bad. For them, everything that happens is wrong, is not good. And as I say you before, when something positive happens, they usually attempt to ignore it, or they usually say, hey, that positive happened because the person is good, but I don't deserve that. They usually think that they don't deserve the good things that happen in them. And just remember, all of these thoughts, are every day, are almost every single time of the day, every single minute. Usually they don't work good. Usually when they are with family, with friends, they seem lost. They have a lost look because they are almost every time thinking about how not good enough they are and how wrong it's their life. So all of these thoughts are overwhelming, are exhausting to the person. And because of that, the person starts to think about suicide, as a way to end with this suffer, as a way to end with this not good life. Another thought is the the negative generalization. This one is about to do a negative conclusion, parting of just one incident or just one mistake. For example, oh, I have a bad result in my test, so that means I'm not intelligent, and that means that I will fail the course and I will repeat the year. So they can make 9 things good, but if they do one thing bad, they think that they are not good enough and they're destined to fail. So when we talk about suicide, I want you to understand that it's not as simple as, oh, they want to die, or oh, they think different they think differently from us, but they have a different perspective of life, a different perspective or of themselves, and we need to understand how their mind works to understand and to empathize the thinking of them, all the thoughts and the behavior surrounding them. Another distortion is the personalization. In the personalization, the person here the person blames himself about some negative events, and they usually don't see another variables, another persons could influence the fact that some event happened. Another thinking in the personalization is to think that other people have a negative attitude to us without having the possibilities or explications of their behavior. For example, my husband left me because I am a terrible wife, but the husband was cheating her. So in that case, the wife doesn't have the fault, but in her mind, she has the fault because she's a terrible wife, doesn't attend the husband in a good way, etc., etc. And an example for thinking that the other person have a negative attitude to us is, for example, my boss is angry with me because I must have done something that he didn't like it. But those persons doesn't see that the boss is just not focused on its job. The boss has an external life, and the boss could be angry or could be mad or sad or whatever because something that happened to him in his family, in his family, or in an external sphere of the work, but they blame their self. Another one is the false. Another is the false comparison, in which the person interprets the events with unrealistic standards. In this false comparison, the person compares with unrealistic ideas. For example, they can compare, if they play basketball, they can compare with Michael Jordan. And usually a thought is Michael Jordan can make dunks, but I can't. So that kind of unrealistic comparison, that false comparison, obviously becomes in a suicidal behavior. Another thought is the what if. In this thought of the what if, but it is not in the way that what if I have done it. Is in the way that so what? So what if I am anxious? So what if I can control my respiration? So in the so what thought is, they start to believe that they are in that way, and probably in the past they were better. but in the future they don't know. In the future they refuses to improve. They refuses to be a better person, and that thought leads us to the emotional reasoning. This emotional reasoning, the person thinks that if I feel that way is because it is. For example, if I feel that I am not enough, is because I am not enough. If I feel that I am going to fail, is because I am going to fail. So they start to believe that they're destined to negative things. So as a conclusion, I would like to add that I that to me is good to the suicide behaviors, the suicide thoughts are multifactorial, because if they are multifactorial, we can have more answers and more ways to help the people, because of the multifactorial facts, we can help the people through the social, we can help the people through the biomedical, through the psychological, and allow us to help a way better that person. And also I want to add that we might be part of the problem, social cultural speaking, but just as we are part of the problem, we can be part of the solution. We can pay attention of the behaviors of our friends, of our parents, of our family, and how our actions and our comments can affect each one of them, and that allow us to empathize better those persons, and realizing that we can be part of the solution. So I want to thank you everyone to be here, and I hope you to be well. Good afternoon, everybody. Adriana in Facebook says, unfortunately, we don't have enough education and enough information about suicide, so we have a lot of stigmas. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Christine. Now we're going to give you the certificate of this session. So prevent La Salle, Nezahualcóyotl, and the psychology faculty of UNAM give you this certificate for your participation in the webinar Las distorciones cognitivas y el riesgo de suicidio in the second International Congress and third National Symposium about the prevention of suicide and promotion of the mental health in childs and teenagers. Thank you very much to everybody for joining us, and we invite you to continue in the next session. Thank you very much, and have a great day.
Gracias. Voy a finalizar la sesión.
Recording in progress.
No se preocupe, no, para nada. No se preocupe, muchas gracias. ¿Me escuchan bien?
Sí, la escucho y la veo bien, perfectamente. Muchas gracias. Solamente que termine de unirse nuestro intérprete y nuestro maestro de ceremonias para poder iniciar.
Súper bien, muchas gracias.
Gracias.
¿Yo puedo compartir pantalla?
Sí, déjame ver. Sí, sí puede. Liliana como intérprete, ¿verdad? Ok, ya lo vi. Okay. No soy yo. Sí, todos los provocamos.
¿Y quién va a ser el moderador?
Ya tenemos a... Ok, hay dos.